My husband left me while I was 7 months pregnant, 17 years later. Our son quietly replaced him at the head of his company. I'll never forget the day he handed me the divorce papers. I was 7 months pregnant, so swollen I couldn't even bend down to tie my shoes. And there he was sitting across from me in our living room like it was just another business meeting. No emotions, no guilt, just a pen and his signature. "I can't keep living in embarrassment," he said flatly. "You don't fit my life anymore. You're average. And clinging to a child won't change that." I couldn't speak, not because I didn't want to, but because I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same man who once promised he'd protect me no matter what. And now he looked at me like I was nothing more than a burden he couldn't shake. He slid the papers across the table. He'd already signed them. All I had to do was walk away. I had no job, no savings, no family nearby. Just the baby growing inside me. His name was Daniel, smart, polished, charming. He came from a long line of men who built legacies and expected perfection. I, on the other hand, was just a receptionist at his father's firm. Ordinary, middle class, a nobody. We met in an elevator. He smiled. Asked what floor. Lunch turned into dinner, and before I knew it, I was in love. I thought it was fate. He made me feel chosen, special. But to his family, I was nothing more than a mistake. His mother once told him right in front of me, "She's not wife material, she's a social climber." Using a pregnancy to lock you in classic move. At first, Daniel defended me, but when I got pregnant and his father threatened to cut him out of the will, he changed. Suddenly, he worked late, stopped calling, stopped coming home. I thought he was just stressed, until I found the text on his second phone. He was seeing his assistant. Of course, when I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He just said, "At least she doesn't use a baby to keep me." He moved out the next day. I packed my bags and left our condo the day after that. No settlement, no support, no idea where to go. I ended up crashing on the couch of a college friend who barely recognized me with the baby bump and the dark circles under my eyes. Every night I'd lie on that couch with one hand on my belly whispering to my unborn son, "I don't care if the world thinks you're a mistake. You are my reason to keep going." A doctor once asked me quietly, gently, if I wanted to consider terminating. Not because of anything medical, but because he could see how alone I was. I didn't hesitate. I kept the baby. Because after everything else had been taken from me, I refused to let anyone take him too. I named him Jacob. And when I say I built our life from scratch, I mean it. No safety net, no babysitter, no family trust fund. I worked nights at diners, cleaned office buildings after hours, took online accounting classes while Jacob napped. People looked at me like I was pitiful. Some just ignored me completely, but I didn't need their pity. I needed to survive. Jacob grew up quiet and observant. He rarely asked for anything, but he watched everything. He watched me clip coupons, watched me build spreadsheets for struggling small businesses in our neighborhood, watched how I stood up straight every time someone tried to look down on us. Daniel never called, never sent a gift, never even acknowledged Jacob's existence. And that used to hurt. But as Jacob got older, I realized something. Daniel may have money status and a shiny last name, but I had something he'd never understand. The kind of bond that's built in silence, in late nights, in sacrifice, in love with no conditions. Jacob wasn't just growing up. He was becoming sharp, curious, capable. I saw it in the way he dismantled broken electronics to figure them out, the way he organized our budget by the time he was 10. The way he asked questions no one expected a kid to ask. And I wasn't the broken woman Daniel left on that couch anymore. I was learning, studying, building something of my own, not for revenge, but so Jacob could someday stand in a room full of men like Daniel, and not just hold his ground, but own the ground they were standing on. Jacob was the kind of kid who never needed much. He didn't beg for toys, he didn't cry for attention, he just watched. He absorbed the world like a sponge, and then started rearranging it in ways I never expected. By the time he was 10, he was balancing my side hustle books better than the free software I'd been using. He built a spreadsheet with formulas I didn't teach him. When I asked how he learned it, he just shrugged and said, "I looked at what you were doing. Then I made it easier." At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just a phase. But then he started asking questions, big ones. about taxes, about liability, about business structures, and why some companies fail while others rise. At 11, he took a cardboard box, cut it into a kiosk, and sold customized bookmarks at his middle school library. By the time I found out, he'd already reinvested the profits into a mini online store. I should have been worried, but all I felt was pride. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding in silence. No one knew my name anymore, which was exactly what I needed. After the divorce, I wiped myself clean from public view, changed addresses, cut ties. There was no point in fighting Daniel's connections head-on. But over the years, while Jacob grew, I kept moving. I got my bookkeeping license, then my certification in small business consulting. I started picking up clients quietly. Most of them were immigrant-owned, family-run, overlooked by the big firms. They trusted me not because I wore a suit or had a fancy office, but because I actually showed up. I helped them navigate cash flow, survive audits, and prepare to scale. And through them, I started seeing how power really worked. It wasn't just about having money. It was about knowing where it moved before it did. When Jacob turned 15, something happened. One of my clients, an old man who ran a mom-and-pop electronics store, passed away suddenly. His son didn't want the business. The family was going to shut it down. But Jacob saw something I didn't. He told me their vendor contracts are outdated, but the margins are still solid. If we streamline distribution and shift online, it could work. I looked at him stunned. He sounded like a 40-year-old investor. He said he wanted to try. He'd saved up from tutoring math and running his little online shop. I matched his savings. We took over the business under my name, quietly, legally, and he ran it. Within a year, profits tripled. He redesigned the website, created a social media presence, built a brand from scratch. And not once did he ask for Daniel's help. Because to Jacob, Daniel wasn't some powerful man to chase. He was just a ghost, a name on a birth certificate no one talked about. Then something I never expected happened. Daniel's company, once this giant, untouchable empire, hit a crisis. A public scandal, mismanagement, PR disasters. And in the aftermath, they started bleeding money. One of the senior VPs, desperate for a solution, reached out to one of my clients, someone I'd helped scale into a regional logistics partner. Guess who they recommended for restructuring me? Of course they didn't know who I was. I went by my maiden name now. My business had grown quietly under an LLC, with no ties to Daniel's world. But when that meeting invite came through with the company name at the top of the email, I stared at it for a long, long time. I didn't say a word to Jacob at first. He was already preparing to apply for early college programs. He didn't need the drama, but the irony: Daniel's company needed me. The woman he once called unremarkable. The woman he thought would fade into irrelevance. They needed my expertise, my network, my structure, and eventually, they'd need my signature. Funny, isn't it? How the same people who once discarded you end up sitting across from you again with their hands out. But I wasn't done yet, because Jacob had plans of his own, and neither of us was playing nice anymore. Jacob never wanted to confront the past. He never asked about his father, not once. He grew up focused on school and ideas, on making something of his own. While other kids were partying or glued to their phones, Jacob was writing business plans, studying coding, and volunteering at local startups, just to understand how they worked from the inside out. When he turned 17, he applied for a business leadership program, one of the most competitive in the state. The kind of program where only 10 students are selected each year. What he didn't know was that the program was fully funded by a corporate sponsor. And that sponsor, Daniel's company. Yes, the same man who divorced me while I was pregnant. The same man who never once asked about Jacob. He'd set up a fund years ago as a PR move to invest in future leaders. And now, unknowingly, he was investing in the very son he discarded. Jacob got in, top of the list. The irony: his acceptance letter had Daniel's signature printed on the bottom of the welcome packet. I stared at that letter for a long time when Jacob showed it to me. He was so proud, beaming with the kind of smile I hadn't seen since he launched his first website. And I couldn't take that from him. So I didn't say anything. I let him go. Let him walk into the building that bore his father's name without knowing the full truth. Because deep down, I wanted Jacob to earn everything on his own. Not out of spite, but because I knew he could. The internship part of the program placed Jacob right in the heart of Daniel's company. He started working on cross-departmental analysis, looking at why the business had started losing market share in recent years. And within weeks, he found things that even the senior analysts missed. He brought me his reports late one night, excited but frustrated. "They're so inefficient, Mom. Half their supply chain is outdated. Their onboarding system is a mess. And no one listens." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because Jacob, without knowing it, was starting to pull apart the empire his father had built, brick by brick. And still no one knew who he really was. To them, he was just a brilliant intern with sharp instincts and no last name that rang any bells. But I knew the truth. He looked like Daniel. The way he moved his hands when he explained something, the slight lift of his brow when he challenged an idea, I saw the echoes of the man I once loved. But Jacob's heart, that was all mine. One day I was asked to join a private strategy meeting. It was a small room, 6 people total. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there, but at the last minute he walked in. Late, confident, unaware. The moment his eyes scanned the table and landed on me, his body stiffened. He didn't say my name, didn't acknowledge me. He just sat down, and I didn't blink. The others introduced me as the consultant they'd brought in to help restructure operations. The woman with a flawless client record. Someone who'd quietly turned 3 companies around in under 5 years. Daniel stared like he'd seen a ghost, but he couldn't object, because I wasn't his ex-wife in that room. I was the solution to his company's survival. I answered questions, pointed out inefficiencies, suggested adjustments, and Daniel. He sat there forced to listen to the woman he once called dead weight. The room dismissed. He stayed behind. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know it was you." I looked him straight in the eyes. "That's because you never looked back." He had the nerve to ask how I'd gotten here, how I'd built all of this, why I never came for help. I almost laughed. "Help you walked out on me while I was carrying your child. The only help I needed was from myself." What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jacob had just submitted a proposal to take over a failing branch of the company. A bold, well-researched pitch that could save millions in losses. And it had caught the attention of the board. They wanted to meet the intern who just weeks ago walked into that building as a nobody. They didn't know they were about to hand the future of the company to the son of the woman Daniel erased from his life, but they were about to. And I didn't stop it. I didn't have to. Because karma doesn't knock. It walks in quietly, wearing your own name on the nameplate. The board had no idea who Jacob was. To them, he was just an exceptionally talented intern, sharp, innovative, and unnervingly calm under pressure. He'd submitted a proposal outlining a full turnaround plan for the company's struggling West Coast branch. A plan so detailed, so forward-thinking, that it stunned the executives who'd been stuck in survival mode for years. They invited him to present. A full meeting, executive floor, everyone in suits holding coffees and contracts, talking numbers and optics. And Jacob. He walked in wearing a clean button-down and the same quiet confidence he always had. No arrogance, no nerves, just clarity. I wasn't in the room that day, but one of the assistants who'd grown fond of Jacob texted me the second the doors closed. "Your son's about to own the room." I smiled, because I knew he would. Daniel was there, of course. He hadn't made the connection yet. Even though Jacob looked like him, even though the last name should have rung some distant, uncomfortable bell. But Daniel never cared about people unless they were useful to him. And Jacob to him was just a kid until that day. Jacob started presenting. PowerPoint slides, projections, phased restructures. He talked about how to trim operational fat, how to rebuild consumer trust, how to modernize legacy systems without losing brand equity. One of the board members asked, "Where did you learn all this?" Jacob didn't hesitate. "My mother. She built 3 businesses from the ground up. I studied everything she did." Daniel's face reportedly twitched. After the meeting, the board was buzzing. One of them said, "This kid's not just smart, he's a shark in a velvet suit." They didn't mean it as an insult. They meant he's someone who gets it, someone who can lead. The CFO pulled me into a private call later that week. He wanted to know more about Jacob, where he came from, how he got so good so fast, how someone so young already understood the soul of a company most execs didn't recognize anymore. I answered every question except one. His father, I left that blank, because I knew it wouldn't stay blank for long. Daniel called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. He left 2 messages. The first was civil, the second was not. He'd figured it out. I listened to him shout into my phone about manipulation and how dare you use our son. As if Jacob was some pawn I'd planted in his precious company. But here's the thing, I never told Jacob who his father was. Never used Daniel's name. Never even whispered it. Jacob built his place in that boardroom by himself. His bloodline had nothing to do with it. Still, Daniel was panicking now, because for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. And the empire he once ruled like a king was slipping into the hands of a kid he abandoned before birth. The final twist came faster than I expected. A board member, curious and clever, ran a background check. And there it was. Jacob's full name, his birth certificate, the absence of Daniel's name in the father section. And suddenly, everyone knew. They didn't say anything publicly, not yet. But whispers started to ripple through the executive floor. The boy Daniel ignored was now the top candidate for the company's Emergency Leadership Development Initiative. Why? Because Jacob understood the numbers. But more importantly, he understood the people. He wasn't just building strategies. He was building loyalty, from the mailroom to the C-suite. And Daniel. He started missing meetings, snapping at assistants, watching helpless as the people around him began to look to someone else for direction. One night, Jacob came home late. I was waiting in the kitchen, pretending not to worry. He sat down, took a deep breath, and said, "Mom, I think they want to offer me a permanent role, like real authority, not just an internship." I looked at him. Still 17, still mine. And I said, "Only take it if it's yours on merit, not because they finally figured out who your father is." He smiled. "They don't care who he is, Mom. They care who I am." And that moment, that was it. That was the moment I knew we'd already won, long before contracts were signed, long before press releases went out. Because Daniel might have built a company, but I raised a man who could run it better, and he was just getting started. The offer came 3 days later. An executive development role custom-built for Jacob. Not just a promotion, a path to succession. The board had reviewed every pitch, every report, every team Jacob quietly led from behind the scenes. They saw the future, and it didn't look like Daniel anymore. It looked like Jacob, 17, focused, measured. The vote wasn't even close. Daniel tried to push back. He claimed conflict of interest, called it nepotism, even though he was the one who left Jacob off the birth certificate in the first place. He accused me of conspiring, planting, manipulating. But the truth was louder than his tantrums. Jacob had outworked every intern, outsmarted every director, and outclassed every executive, including his own father. And the board, they were tired. Tired of Daniel's ego. Tired of the losses. Tired of pretending that loyalty meant competence. So they gave him a choice: step down quietly, or be removed publicly. He chose silence. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't fight. He cleared his desk in 2 hours. No farewell party. No press release. Just a quiet line added to the bottom of a Monday memo. Effective immediately, Daniel Whitmore has resigned. And Jacob. He didn't celebrate. He just went back to work. Because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't payback. This was justice. And justice doesn't always look like screaming matches or courtroom wins. Sometimes, it looks like a kid walking into the office his father once ruled and doing it better. The media caught wind eventually. They speculated. Rising star replaces legacy CEO. Mysterious prodigy shakes up corporate giant. No one knew the full story, except us. One reporter tried to dig. They asked me for a quote, something emotional, something scandalous. I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because the truth didn't belong in a headline. It belonged to Jacob. And he had already rewritten the ending. Months passed. The company stabilized. Then it grew. Under Jacob's guidance, they cut waste, rebuilt trust, and launched 2 initiatives supporting young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. No one asked him to do that. He just remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, erased. He wanted to make sure no one like him ever had to fight so hard just to be seen. One evening, he came home later than usual. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. He sat down at the counter and said quietly, "I added your name today." I looked up. What? He smiled. "To the founders list. On the official site. It just says this company would not be here without the brilliance and sacrifice of my mother." I didn't cry, not right away. But my hands shook a little when I set down the knife. He stood, kissed my forehead, and said, "You built me. I built this. We're even." So no, this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about patience, about quiet resilience, about what happens when the person they discarded becomes the one they depend on. Daniel didn't just lose a company. He lost the chance to know the man Jacob became, and that's the kind of justice no courtroom can deliver. Because when you walk away from a family, you never expect they'll be the ones writing your ending. But Jacob did, and I watched, with pride and peace.